Right now, we're going to welcome our next live guest. We've got Barry LaPatner with us, who is back again. We talked to him a couple months ago, right after the infrastructure plan got passed completely by the Biden administration. And now we're going to touch on a little bit of the White House kind of waving the white flag, as we talked to Steve Ferrer about last week. So, Barry, thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to start off just by asking, has the White House done all that they can do when it comes to supporting transportation?
Well, let's remember, excuse me, that the White House put out a plan that ultimately was passed by Congress on a bipartisan basis, something kind of unusual in Washington in recent years. And as a result, we have a plan that had to go through the political mill and had to be something for everybody, which means every congressman, every senator is going to be receiving billions of dollars in funds to their locale. And of course, the main thing that they want to do once that money arrives in their state is to have the opportunity to control that money. So the outline of where this money is to go is not as detailed and as mandated as it could be or should be. And therefore, there's a lot of wiggle room in many states in order to use that funds. But what we have seen in recent weeks and months, I think February, the Biden administration put out 4 new outlines of plans to insist that monies be there to tighten up how to engage more labor, how to have more training, how to apply export credits to U.S. firms that are selling goods abroad, which will help us with semiconductors, biotech, biomedical products, and the like. We've also seen more plans to leverage $1 billion in funding from the American Rescue Plan to reduce the concentration and increase competition within the agricultural sector by enhancing processing capacity. So all of these steps that are taken are going to impact the trucking industry, going to bring back more production and manufacturing to the U.S., and decrease the reliance that we've had for 30 or 40 years on overseas goods.
And Barry, with midterms coming up, is this going to be a huge factor into this infrastructure bill and spending? Seems like every 2 years, whether it's a midterm or main election, that there's going to be some big platform to stand on. Is this going to be one of those areas?
Well, if you're the Democrats, you want to stand on this platform and start beating the bush with all your constituencies about how important it is that they're going to have high-paying jobs, training to move people out of the coal industry into how to deconstruct and close down oil wells, which is high-paying jobs, and training for new high-design technology jobs. You want to beat that as much as you can to gain the leverage because it is a Democratic plan. If you're the Republicans, you're going to claim credit for the plan by saying it wouldn't have happened if we didn't support it. So I think the midterm elections are not going to be kind of decided on infrastructure issues. I think there are other issues, mainly cultural issues, which are going to be more the deciding factor in the upcoming midterms.
I think it's interesting because we talk a lot about how this election cycle, we passed the infrastructure bill last November, now the election cycle comes up, and is there a chance to undo the progress that was made? But that won't necessarily happen unless we see a big shift in the presidential administration that rolls back the approval of that law. And I want to kind of talk about the flow of money coming out of the infrastructure bill. If it's been put forth so far, if it's that slow release where we're not really seeing the impacts from that funding yet.
Well, we're seeing state departments of transportation announce new projects. We're seeing, for instance, in New York and New Jersey, one of the largest infrastructure projects of great interest to the nation because of the flow of traffic and supplies up the East Coast is called the Gateway Project. And this is a tunnel under the Hudson River, a second tunnel, because only one that we exist right now is a total hazard, and during Hurricane Sandy was basically shut down all the commerce up and down the East Coast. So this is a $13 $14 billion project that is already in process of moving forward. And we're seeing rural projects for new wireless connections. And Homeland Security has announced that it's doing many, many projects that are infrastructure in nature. And so as the year proceeds and through 2022, we're going to see almost all states have new projects moving forward with funding from this program.
And Barry, as we continue to look forward, I mean, one of the big things that we just saw was Governor Brian Kemp issuing a state of emergency for the supply chain. Do you anticipate other federal leaders really taking the same steps? Do you see this as a little too late? What do you see for this movement going forward?
Well, I think you're going to see politicians who are running for office come up with a lot of crazy schemes. We saw something strange in Texas in recent days that fortunately didn't last too long and stopped all of the communications and traffic from Mexico. But just think about what Brian Kemp said. He said, we want to ban gouging on goods and services such as diesel fuel and gasoline. And that's a nice thing to say. Okay, I'm not quite sure what role he can play in this other than to have his enforcement division attorney general go around and see if improper charges for gasoline are being done locally, which every state is doing. But when he limits, he says, I'm going to take off limits for the gross vehicle weight for tractors, trailers, and freight carriers up to 95,000 pounds and with a maximum width of 10 feet can operate on Georgia's state and local roads. Those of us in the infrastructure world understand that what he's doing is creating a disaster for the local roads around the state because they're not built to handle 18-wheelers with those kinds of weights storming those roads. And so all we're going to see is a tremendous increase in the amount of money budgeted by the state of Georgia to repair all those roads. And local people are not going to want to see 18-wheelers coming through their small towns because he's increased that. So these are the kind of things that are probably not fully thought through, but they're done in order to attract some local short-term political attention. And we prefer the suggestions that are well thought out and have a chance to be kind of considered on a broader perspective than just any politician, Democrat or Republican, just coming out and using that to gain the day's attention.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because the interesting thing about the restrictions being lifted is that it doesn't translate to the federal interstate highway system, which of course the majority of truck transportation uses. So it almost kind of seems like a side of political posturing with another side of being pointless in the fact that you bring it up. Is there any chance for restrictions like that to be lifted on a federal level, do you think? And even if it was, would it even make a difference?
Well, I think you have to understand when you start removing restrictions, there's a cost. There's a cause and effect for those kinds of things. The reason our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our tunnels, all of our highway system is so badly in need of billions and billions of dollars of funding is because for 40 years we have not done the maintenance. So what's the sense of fixing all the potholes on a road? What's the sense of fixing our bridges or the decks on our bridges if we're about to speed up the damage that can occur over 10 years and make it happen over 3 years? It's kind of counterproductive and it doesn't make sense, and prudent people will rise up to explain that that's not a good idea.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting to get that take of things, Barry. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's great to have you. If people want to get in contact with you and maybe learn a little bit more about what you do, are you on LinkedIn? Are you on social media? Where can they find you?
Well, go to blepatner at lepatner.com or just lepatner, lepatner.com, and you'll find out more about me and the books I've written on infrastructure and the construction world as well.
All right, great, Barry. Thank you so much again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.